So our next speaker is Shadi Abuzara, who is Principal Accessibility Standards and Policy Manager at Amazon. Shadi also has many years of past experience doing accessibility strategy work at the W3C. So we're very happy to welcome him back with us here today. So Shadi, the mic is yours.
Great to be back. Great to be back in Sofia and many colleagues and friends. This is a great, I'm really happy to be here. So we at Accessibility, we have a long history of particularly the web content accessibility guidelines, but of W3C standards and resources being adopted by policies. And in the W3C Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, we have this tenet that we develop the ruler, not the rule, meaning that we work on defining a measure for accessibility and don't define what is acceptable and what's not. And I think that's a very good principle to be considering and to be living by, which kind of like maps out a little bit what is the role of a standards organization, what is the standard role of a policy manager, policy or a regulator to be working in. And it works quite well in many cases. There are many examples. For example, the EU Web Accessibility Directive applies specifically to government websites and mobile apps or public entities. And it defines what public entities are and what they're not. And for some reason, the regulator decided that these websites and apps are particularly important for civic participation or whatever. And they decided that for those, WCAG level AA, conformance level AA should apply. The European Accessibility Act went further and enumerated certain kinds of sectors, including e-commerce, for example, services, providing communication services, and audiovisual media services, things like that. So it picked out, again, particular sector that it thought are particularly important, and again, applied WCAG level AA conformance as the ruler. So it decided the rule. So overall, this kind of separation of responsibilities, we focus on the technical standard, what does accessibility mean, and the regulator focuses on how to apply it, where to apply it, and the requirements around that. And that works pretty well. I see Kevin already smiling, because when you look in more detail, it starts to get a bit more blurry. For example, within the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, we separated requirements at the time when we were writing it. For example, there are many such examples in WCAG, but captioning for one. We separated between captioning of so-called pre-recorded media and captioning of live media. The reason is not that the accessibility user needs are different. Somebody who's deaf and hard of hearing has different requirements if it's live media or if it's pre-recorded. That is absolutely not the reason why we did that. We did that because at the time, it still continues, we thought one thing is more challenging to accomplish than the other. And so one is easier to achieve, one is other. And so we placed one in one conformance level, one in another. There are many such examples with link purpose, for example, with color contrast, even with keyboard traps or keyboard access. So there's several such requirements. Audio descriptions is another one that comes to mind, where we have separated them and put them in different levels based on kind of, I'll come back to this later, the conformance levels are not really well defined. Actually it goes even further. The conformance section of WCAG, there's an optional section that talks about when you can put a conformance claim on your website. And that talks about you can keep a conformance claim on your website if you are regularly monitoring your website and fix issues within 5 business days. This is just an example, this is just optional, but the idea is that we really got into procedural aspects that are not really the measure. It's kind of already starting to set up policies. Like, if you can fix your issues within 5 business days, then you can still keep your conformance claim. You're still kind of considered accessible because you're doing reasonable effort to keep it accessible. And that's kind of like getting into the policy side of things. On the policy side, we also have these kind of gray areas. For example, I mentioned the Web Accessibility Directive. The Web Accessibility Directive decided to exclude live media altogether, right? So it went in and changed the technical standard. Actually said, no, actually that requirement, we don't like it, or we think it's too difficult, or whatever. So we're just going to remove that. Overrides the technical standard. We see in maps, for example, have also been excluded, or certain kind of things like that. And again, there are many such examples. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think it's illusionary to really have this puristic view that technical standards and regulations are completely separate. They're intertwined, they go hand in hand, and they're two sides of the same coin. And at W3C, I have seen over the years, a pendulum swing from sometimes where we recognize, and I think on the Way website right now, there is a section, resources specifically for policymakers, and it's considered as a stakeholder, and we recognize that. And sometimes even saying the word regulation was kind of like a touchy thing at W3C, and the pendulum kind of swung in different ways along the years, back and forth. And I deeply feel that we need to more formally really recognize policymakers and regulators as a stakeholder. Many member organizations are government organizations, government agencies. They are at the table, and they need to be more at the table. I see this in particularly in the light of WCAG 3 and the development and addressing the challenges that we currently have in accessibility. We need some form of a gradient, and it's already encapsulated in WCAG 2. In essence, as I said, like with these saying, okay, this is in level 1, this is in level 2, this is in level 3, which essentially means it's excluded from most policies around the world. We see that, there were good reasons why WCAG is doing that. It's trying to capture this kind of how does accessibility really address the lived experience of people with disabilities. But we know that we haven't gone far enough. Our ruler in WCAG is very coarse. It only provides 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. And even those are very arbitrary, right? It's a ruler with just 3 notches, and these notches are not even at equidistance or whatever. They're just really all over the place. There isn't a formal definition for level A, AA, and AAA. Some of the considerations that went in are how much does it actually impact, how critical, how much of a blocker is it to being able to use a website? But also how much does it impact the UI, and how much does it, how difficult is it to apply in reality, and all these kind of considerations. And then we came up with let's put this in level A, or let's put this in AA, or with a lot of discussions, a lot of thoughtful discussions. I'm not trying to be, downplay that. It was really good discussions, but at the end of the day, we couldn't actually really say why something is in one level versus another. It is because we just decided how it is. But we need something more granular, and we need something that is more helpful to allow more tools, better regulations. For example, imagine we can define how good captioning is, or audio description, or something. And we can leave it up to the regulator to decide the particular levels. Maybe the regulator will decide that for captioning cat videos on YouTube, maybe a different level of quality is acceptable and can be achieved with automated captioning than, say, emergency notifications, things that are really impactful. Right now, we don't give the regulator such a tool to be able to do that. And it's a tricky issue. It's a very slippery slope. There are good reasons why people are concerned about trying to define such a gradient, because we start saying something is more important than the other. Something is more of an issue than the other. Will that let people stop at 90% because, hey, it's good enough, I worked already 90%, or even 60%? There are many tricky issues and many things that we need to solve. What does it actually really mean to have a percentage or some level? For one person, It could be a nuisance. This ramp here, for example, for somebody it's difficult. For me, it's impossible to get up here. So, one issue can be a nuisance for another person. It can be a blocker for another person. But if we keep saying everything is equally important for everyone, nothing is important. And it's a hard discussion to have, and it's a gradient to have. So why am I saying this? In conclusion, again, I feel in order to really address the challenges that we have in accessibility nowadays, we need to work more together. We need to recognize that regulation is the other part of the coin of the technical standard that we're developing. We end up having a lot of discussions about, well, we can't really do this because that will have such and such impact on regulator. We pretend sometimes to be the regulator, and then we go back and say, no, we just developed the rule or not the rule. So in order for us to really make headway with WCAG 3 and with accessibility, I feel we even need to provide guidance for policymakers. Dear policymakers, when you are adopting WCAG in policies, here are some of the considerations from a technical perspective that you need to be aware of. Here's how you can create better policies that work, that better reflect the lived experience of people with disabilities, but also from a technical side. So maybe accessibility is a forerunner and has had long experience in being adopted in regulations and working with regulations together. But I think we need more of that in the coming period, and I need to work more closely together with the regulators, and I hope W3C will now be more in the phase of taking up that challenge and being ready to work with regulators. Thank you.